Good afternoon, everyone. I'm John Quincy, Chair of the Ways and Means Committee, and this is our regularly scheduled Ways and Means Committee meeting. There are 22 items on our agenda today, but before we start that, of course, we're joined by Council Members Andrew Johnson, Lene Palmisano, and Blong Yang, so we're a quorum of this committee. But before we started the actual agenda, I wanted to take a few moments and catch Mr. Carpenter off guard. Which is fun. No, I'm pleased to say that today we're launching a new financial transparency platform powered by OpenGov.com. It provides residents and city officials unprecedented access to the city's finances. As Mayor Hodges mentioned in the press release that went out earlier today marks a big leap forward in increasing financial transparency in Minneapolis. Making this data available online in an easily accessible format will not only result in more informed public, but also help city leaders and staff digest complex financial information to help run the city better. We've heard from residents, as well as our own city leaders and staff, that they wanted to have an easy-to-use tool that would show how the city manages its finances. And I wanted to take this opportunity to acknowledge this big step forward, and to thank staff, in particular Kevin Carpenter and your entire finance team, but Sandy Christensen deserves a special shout out, and of course Jeff Snyder, as well as our IT department friends. And so if Mr. Carpenter, if you wanted to say how great this is, I'll give you that chance.
Mr. Chair, it's awesome.
That away.
And thank you for your words.
It is a great step, so thank you, and there's going to be more coming out on that. I know the media has been invited to a special demonstration of that this afternoon at 3 o'clock, and I'm sure that's going to lead to more questions than answers, but it's a great step forward as we refine that tool and make it useful. So on our agenda today, we have the 22 items. The first is a series of 5 legal settlements. Then we have the city coordinators authorizing city officials to enter into a contract with Minneapolis Downtown Council for supporting the downtown activation events in 2015. The Communications Department brings forward 2 donation resolutions accepting donated broadcast time and billboard space. The Convention Center, we have 3 items. One is an escalator replacement project. Another is a Convention Center fabric removal project, and the Target Center Arena ice floor project. Finance Department is bringing forward a re-roofing project for fire station, which fire station? Number 2 and number 28, and police precinct number 4. Information Technology Department has the Minneapolis Police Department photo imaging system and the MPD's fingerprint system, as well as a contract amendment for Enterprise Resource Planning Program, our ERP program. This it's actually not an amendment, it's executing a 2-year contract. The Police Department is bringing forward a grant, accepting a grant, authorizing a grant with Minnesota Homeland Security and Emergency Management for bomb disposal unit. The Community Development and Regulatory Services Committee is forwarding 3 items for approval. And one is the issuance of the tax-exempt revenue bonds in 2015 and impact funds for the Minnesota Housing Finance Agency Community Home Ownership projects, as well as the 2015 U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development Housing Opportunities for Persons with AIDS. It's the HOPWA grant. The Transportation and Public Works Committee is bringing forward a number of items related to the Minnehaha Avenue Reconstruction Cooperative Agreement and parking restrictions, a water main work cooperative agreement, a accepting of 3 Hennepin County public space recycling grants for its public space recycling grant program, the 10th Avenue Storm Tunnel Reconstruction and Rehab Project, and authorizing execution of agreement to transfer ownership of the Martin Olav Sabo pedestrian and bicycle bridge from Hennepin County to the city of Minneapolis, as well as 2 bids for various, a pedestrian intersection ramp and a closed circuit inspection of city's storm drain systems, accepting that low bid. And so those are the 21 items on our consent agenda. Any questions or comments from my colleagues on those items? Not seeing any. All those in favor of those items, please say aye.
Aye.
And opposed? Those items are brought forward so for the city council meeting. So thank you for staff for all of their work on those projects. Our big item today to discuss is, of course, the information technology outsourcing contracts. We're going to welcome Mr. Otto Dahl, our Chief Information Officer, and let's see what we got. Thank you, Mr. Dahl.
Thank you, Chairman Quincy, members of the committee. Good afternoon. I'd like to talk briefly here on the RCA for provision of IT services, or better known as the outsourcing arrangement for the city of Minneapolis. Just to kind of set the background for the journey that the city's been on, way back in December of 2002, an outsourcing contract was originally signed with Unisys, and that started outsourcing of IT services within Minneapolis. The contract with Unisys was renegotiated in 2007. There were some additional services added, such as the PC and server refresh service that we have today, as well as some security and detection software, and disaster recovery was added as a service. We also added more service level agreements, and in particular service credits with an earn back potential, and those aspects proceeded from 2007 forward. In 2010, the contract was renegotiated again. We reduced costs due to some of the challenges we were having from the recession that was going on at the time, as well as added some services in change management, a few security services as well. And back in 2010, and that was the end of 2010, the council informed IT that we really needed to position ourselves to go back out on the street and recompete this contract. And so when I came on board in February of 2011, I spent really the first couple of years getting to understand and work with the contract that we had and to start research. And in 2013 is when we really kicked off our efforts in the actual physical process that would have to take place for us to recompete this. And we took a very detailed, phased approach to getting us to where we are today, where I can present a contract to council for these services. In phase one, which all occurred in 2013, first of all, we set up some governance. We set up a steering committee of council members, the CFO and the CIO, and the city coordinator to help guide the overall process. We also set up a working group of department heads and myself, in which to get input and to keep department heads aware of the progress of the project. We did a lot of surveying of everyone to really seek out what the organization wanted out of its outsourcing arrangement, and to get us into a situation where, through understanding what the market was like out there for outsourcing services, input from various outside organizations. We went to IT research firms, we went to private industry, particularly large firms here locally in the area, since we're graced with some Fortune 500 and other large firms that do a lot of outsourcing themselves, as well as talking to our colleagues in the public sector, both at the state and local level. We then hired Pillsbury Global Sourcing Services through a firm, and they have been with us every step of the way through this whole process, and I'll be talking more about their contributions as we go on. So that really kind of set the stage. we turned around and ultimately produced an RFP, which was brought to you in early 2014 as seeking your okay for us to go out and issue that RFP out there, and which we did. And then we started really into phase 2, which was the process of actually going out, and whether it's a pre-proposal conference and going through all the steps that we need to in order to run an RFP process. We did get 18 responses. We ultimately narrowed that down to 5 that we looked at in depth. We had those firms back in. We turned around and ultimately determined through this process, did they fit organizationally? Did they meet with their solution to the problems that we had stated, the challenges and the opportunities we wanted to take advantage of in the city? And we ultimately then selected 2 of those vendors to go forward into actual negotiations, so that we had basically a 2-horse race coming into the final wire. And we went through that process. Now, we had partners all along the way. We've been talking with finance. We'd also been talking with civil rights for various aspects of this contract. And we ultimately also had a full-time lawyer from the city attorney's office, which could enter into and help us along with Pillsbury's legal staff in the actual negotiation process. We spent a lot of time in phase 3 going through what's known as a term sheet negotiations. This, as one can quite imagine, had many, many pieces to it. There were a lot of things that we had to keep track of. And so there was a very good process for us to basically lay out what is the responsibility, the role of vendor or vendors to what the city is going to be doing in IT, and ultimately structuring this so that it could literally be laid within the foundation of the contract that we are going to ultimately be signing for the city. So there were no surprises by the time we got to negotiation as to what the city was asking for, and ultimately what the vendors through this whole RFP process had been working towards from the beginning. So it really worked out in a very judicious manner. Obviously, we then went into due diligence efforts. We checked out the 2 contenders in further detail by talking to current and past customers of theirs, as well as checking within the industry for their reputation, et cetera. And we ultimately come down to a decision, which I'll talk about here in a moment, because as we enter into phase 4, which is really transitioning from our current supplier to a new supplier. And that transition needs to happen obviously seamlessly. Hopefully people won't realize it's going on. But there's a fair amount of effort that has to take place for us to accomplish that, and a fair amount of training, et cetera, on the new processes that will have to be invoked. So with that overall arching process that we went through, we ultimately are proposing the following. In the past with Unisys, Unisys did these 4 major areas of IT work for the city. They basically have a data center. That's where our servers, our computers run the applications and information systems that the departments use. They supply some of the networking services. We actually have a separate contract for, if you will, the communication lines, whether fiber or copper amongst our buildings, et cetera, and out to the internet, through a separate contract, which actually was recompeted about 18 months ago. CenturyLink had that and has won it again, so that will stay separate. There are security services, and we were seeking actually more services in security, as you're probably well aware with all the various events that have taken place place the last few years, security is more and more a challenge out there. And so we really need to, if you will, up our game in that world. And then finally, there is the help desk, or if you will, that number you call to get service or help of some fashion, as well as the desktop support teams who go around, and you probably see them work on machines, setting up new machines for new employees, et cetera, around the city. So what we're proposing is giving the contract to OneNeck, which is was originally a Twin Cities area company out of Eden Prairie, back when they were known as Visi. They're now part of OneNeck, which is a company held out of Arizona, which is also now a subsidiary of TDS Incorporated, which is out of Chicago. And as we probably all are familiar with, companies move about acquiring one or another over time, and that's most definitely true in the IT industry. We try to, we gave every vendor the opportunity to bid on one or more pieces of this, and we also did an assessment as to which, if any of these pieces, we might consider to be brought in-house. We determined that the only piece that seemed to be viable to at least consider to be brought in-house or insourced, if you will, was the service desk and outsourcing, service desk and desktop services area, which we're ultimately proposing is brought in. And I'll talk in more detail about that decision and the cost ramifications of that. OneNeck is providing the services, and they have put together, if you will, a consortium in the sense that they've brought in Solutionary as a firm that will do security services. We think this is good in a number of reasons. One, obviously, that they meet our needs that we see in the security and privacy world, but also gives some degree of independence. It's sort of like the fox in the hen house that's not the best guard. And so we really think this is a very good arrangement when it comes to matters of security and privacy. So that's how we're structuring the contract. And why did we choose OneNeck over all the others? Well, first of all, and you've probably heard it in the term of speed to market or quick implementations. In today's world, when you can lessen the amount of time from when you decide when you want to do something with IT and being able to get the resources spun up, if you will, and made available for that application that you're purchasing or that you have built, for instance, the amount of time that it takes to do that, what we found was OneNeck's solution was very flexible and very fast at bringing those resources online for the city's uses. We also found that their pricing was extremely competitive, competitive to the nature that we're going to see ultimately a 25% annual cost reduction over our existing contract. We also saw that their service level and credit methodology was very favorable to us. And in particular, it showed in the sense of their feeling that they will do the job and they will do it well. And we feel that it shows the right attitude that we want in a supplier. And so that was something that really struck us as very positively. Also, they allowed us to put in mechanisms that did not lock us into them. Beyond just each one of those those three areas I talked about that they'll have responsibility for, we can recompete those independently, whereas today it's an all or nothing game with all areas. And so that gives us the ability to look at this in a smaller chunk. And so therefore, if we do any future changes, we will not necessarily have such a large transition cost the overall process. And then finally, well, actually next to last, that exit flexibility, one other thing is, as I was mentioning in the security arena, security is very important in our ability to do a job across all phases, even if we were to swap out vendors in the future. And again, we found OneNext solution very adaptable to our need of being able to ensure that security was across all services, regardless of who ultimately was providing a given piece of the IT outsourcing world. And then finally, their local data center, which is actually in Eden Prairie, as well as our secondary or disaster data center that they have, are close by. Far enough apart to serve adequately in the case of a disaster here locally, but most definitely close for us if we would ever need to have our people get to those areas, particularly in the case of a disaster. And so that was advantageous in their solution. There's nothing like having to try to bring up an organization in a disaster center that you have to turn around and fly your people off someplace in some far distant land to get everything up and going properly. Now, insourcing most definitely, there were really two aspects in general. When we talk to people about what do you outsource and what don't you, what we found was that vendors, of course, they're going to have a business model, and they're going to want to be able to basically crank that business model every day, right? Because that's how they're going to be making their money. And our organization is changing every day, every month, as is the industry. And so our ability to have flexibility in reacting to our clients, particularly as our workforce changes and its characteristics and demographics, as they get younger, as they get more comfortable with technology over time, and our ability to adopt to a changing organization and changing industry drives us to an insourcing solution. Also, because of the consumerization of IT, in particular young people, they're used to whipping out their smartphone or their tablet and downloading an application and having it drive up. And they expect that same type of process to take place in the corporate world as well. And so our drive is to create and have a solution that drives us to doing that sort of service level and orientation to our workforce in general. Also, another area was that IT, by having architects and designers and very high-level IT folks, has never had an opportunity to move people, if you will, up through the organization, because we didn't have anyone that was on the staff at the lower levels of the IT skill ladder. And so this is going to allow us to also have that ladder, and hopefully that we can grow people ourselves internally. It is always challenging for us to find people on the outside. It's easier for us to find folks at the lower levels because there's just that many more folks out there at that level. And their price points, i.e. their salary requirements and others, are within range of what we can offer in the city. We also feel that through working with organizations like Creating IT Futures, Genesis Works, MCTC interns, that we're able to pull from those resources that will help us in reaching our racial equity needs within the department, and ultimately helping the city meet its city government meets its goals as well. And in the future, because we control that relationship, that change management, if you will, of our IT environment, our ability to move with other new outsourcing suppliers should be much easier. And then ultimately, and this is probably something we expected, we'd see some cost savings, but not to the degree that we found. And what we discovered in talking with people and doing our research is that this happens to be the most lucrative part of outsourcing. These large outsourcing firms do all of these different aspects of outsourcing that we've talked about, but particularly the help desk or the service desk is probably the most lucrative piece of their business, followed closely by desktop support. It's people intensive. They get to leverage that across their user base. And so what we found in the proposals was that the city could do it far cheaper than industry was quoting that they could do it for. And so ultimately, when we considered all of this, we really felt that OneNeck was the best solution for us. And so hence what we brought forward with you today is we'd like to enter into a 5-year contract with 3 one-year options to renew for a total contract value of $22 million. We'd also like to retain Pillsbury, Winthrop, Shaw, and Pittman, which is the firm that we've been using throughout this whole process to help us during the transition process. There is a lot of technical aspects as well as negotiation with our existing provider in order to see to it that we have a smooth, successful transition. We'd also need to transfer some assets, for instance, those computers on your desk, some of our servers and so forth. We need to transfer those into city-owned property. And that is something that was built into the original contracts with Unisys, and so we need to turn around and execute on those as well. And then finally, I'll need a budget amendment for the 2015 budget to allow us to hire 33 people that will man the service desk and desktop services. Please recognize that we will continue to have 24/7 help desk services. There is a lot of city employees that are out and about at all hours of the day, whether it's the police force, the fire department, public works at times, et cetera. And so it's very important that we are staffed up to support around-the-clock support. And obviously our ability to get to someone's desktop, no matter where they may be in the city, is important. And so that is one reason for the levels. We did calculate these levels based on well-known metrics of the service or help desk community that's out there to right-size the staff so that we feel we can give the level of support that the city deserves. And ultimately, I really think that we've done our due diligence the last couple of years throughout this whole process. I'm very pleased with the ultimate outcome, and I seek your support, and we'll answer any questions you may have.
See what kind of questions we can have. Thank you very much, Mr. Dahl, for bringing this forward to us. Council Vice President Glidden.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. And I will say, Mr. Dahl, kind of congratulations at getting to this point. And I just say that really because this has been a long process with a very large staff team, primarily from IT, but across multiple departments. And as we know, this was a very large contract and really took a lot of work to evaluate it properly, look at what were our options, and then go through a process to come out with a recommendation to the policymakers for how to move forward. So I just want to thank you for your work with others to steer this team. I actually am really excited about a number of elements in here, but before I kind of get to more general comments, I want to make sure I'm understanding the financial information that's in here. And there were some pieces I just wasn't clear about in what was presented. So, and I think I hadn't realized we had this revised RCA that's now online. So I'm looking at that piece online too. So I see the total contract value, which is over 5 years. So this will be paid in yearly installments, or maybe you want to talk to us about how that will work. And then I didn't see a number for transition costs, although you talked generally about the need for transition costs. And so I would like to understand what are the transition costs. The third thing is I need some understanding of what would be the budget for hiring the 33 FTEs, because I think that also is a separate item from the contract amount. And so I just want to understand some of these big ticket items, as this is part of what we're being asked to authorize.
Right. Okay. Chairman Quincy, Councilmember Glidden, the contract is paid in multiple ways, and you need to recognize that there is, we make payments on a monthly basis. We're planning on making payments on a monthly basis based on the asset levels that we're at within the contract. The 22 million is a top amount that we're asking for that has some growth and what have you built into it over time. And so there are formulas for calculating based on what assets, what resources OneNeck is supplying to us and overall services, which creates a base cost that we end up paying off on a monthly basis across time, because that will change potentially from month to month if we add resources as we go forward. There can be instances where the city, well, let me finish going through the three and then I'll go back. Second thing is you asked about was the cost of the transition cost. Right now, we have estimated that the transition cost is $9.8 million. That could change because there is a piece of contingency in there based on ultimately what we may have to pay Unisys for some of their services in order to do the transition, excuse me, as well as some other aspects that are still being worked out, and we really won't have all of that nailed down until we actually get into transition. We feel very comfortable that that is an upper limit, and we're hopeful that that will be driven down through the overall process. But most definitely, it could reach ultimately 9.8 million. Okay. I forgot your third.
That's all right. And then I asked, and then I'll have one more follow-up, and I'm not seeing others with questions, so maybe I'll just keep going. So the transition costs, and then I asked about the budget for hiring the FTEs.
Yes.
Mr. Dahl, perhaps Ms. Christensen could illuminate that as well as where that cost or where that funds will be available from.
Chair Quincy, Councilmember Glidden, we've been working very closely with the IT department to flesh out the various costs associated with this proposal, and backtracking a little to your first question regarding the transition costs. We've identified approximately $10 million, as Mr. Dahl indicated, that is currently available in existing funds within what we call the Information Technology Fund. There's costs that we allocate across the enterprise, and we've accumulated these funds over time in anticipation of the need to do something different with these services. And so although it would appear as a one-time cost, we have already accumulated resources, so there shouldn't be significant impact organization-wide as a result of these transition costs. And then in terms of the 33 FTEs, in round figures, it's approximately $3 million.
And so, and Ms. Christensen, I will say you kind of answered anticipating what was one of my follow-up questions on how are we going to accommodate the transition costs. And this is something that we, I guess as an enterprise, have been planning for as a contingency over time. And then with the addition of employees to the IT budget, can you tell me how that works with amending the IT budget so that they're able to hire these employees? And I'm anticipating, we haven't this may be for a future presentation. I don't want to get too far down the road, but this all does tie into the Ways and Means presentation about finances is when will you need that money? When are we anticipating hiring these employees? And if we're transitioning in this year or starting that period once we take an action, if we did approve this, I would assume we were hiring some folks to be on board this year.
Indeed, Chair Quincy, Councilmember Glidden, part of those, the $10 million in transition costs does include the onboarding of the 33 FTEs that will happen during 2015 so that they're ready to hit the ground running when the contract with the current vendor expires and we move into the new arrangement. So included in that $10 million that I alluded to earlier is the cost associated with adding the staff. So the fact that we're utilizing the fund balance dollars, they're existing, we'll utilize them as they're necessary when the staff are brought on board. And from an ongoing funding perspective, that will be contemplated in the 2016 budget, at which time we'll be seeing some of the savings that Mr. Dahl alluded to earlier with going with the new vendor.
Okay.
So from a service or from a current service level standpoint, it will be fluid.
So how you are using that word onboarding, it includes, having space for them,
Correct.
their equipment needs, but also their actual salary for
Correct.
2015.
Yes.
Okay. There was another question. And then I guess my other question is, we did hear kind of, I guess, a general narrative of there's going to be some cost savings in here, but I'm not sure because I'm not seeing the numbers just put together. How does that work with the adding in transition costs to the new cost of service going forward? And I will say, I think there's many other elements that Mr. Dahl talked about that are separate from kind of just that pure dollars and cents that I think are important to the city. So I don't want to just skip over that, but I do want to understand this financial piece.
Chair Quincy, Councilmember Glidden, the proposal with the new vendor in its current form provides for approximately 25% savings over the existing contract. That would also include the addition of staff. However, given that we are depleting to some extent the fund balance associated with these transition costs, there will be somewhat of a need to replenish some of those funds. So in terms of there being a bottom line total reduction citywide as a result of the transition, it's not going to equate to exactly the 25%, but it will be less than what is currently being spent with the existing vendor.
So it might be nice just to see those numbers laid out a little bit more simply, and I think that could be done, I think, and I would appreciate that.
Thank you. So I just wanted to clarify, as you were addressing Council Vice President Glidden's question about transition costs and the cost of onboarding new staff for the insourcing part of this contract. That's $1 figure. It's all included in the transition cost?
Chair Quincy, yes, that $10 million is all inclusive of the additional costs necessary to get us up and running on
Gotcha.
January 1st of 16.
Want to clarify that. Thank you. Councilmember Bender has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had similar questions, and one piece that I wanted to hear more about was this benefit number 4 that's listed is under the key benefits is avoid supplier lock-in through favorable termination clauses. So maybe you could talk more about that, but I also wanted to understand, given that the transition costs do seem significant for a 5-year contract, what is the likelihood that we would terminate this contract and pursue a different vendor? Can you talk about how maybe it seems like there's a significant transition cost? How is that not locking us into this service?
Chairman Quincy, Councilmember Bender, good question. There's a few dynamics that would drive us to reconsider or look at a new vendor. Obviously, if things are not working out, if service levels are not being met, et cetera, then most definitely we'd want to consider and we wanted to structure something that gave us the ability to get out from underneath what would really be a bad situation. Another dynamic that could affect the city is either the IT industry changes radically from, the solution that we have formed with OneNeck for taking the city forward that needs us to drive in a different direction and maybe with a different set of suppliers or a different supplier. And so we'd also want that option because as much as we look at our crystal ball as to where we think IT is headed, I'm sure it's going to go in ways that we can't imagine now. Not to mention the final dynamic to me is just how the city needs to progress and what its attitude and orientation is. And we may need to do things differently. We may need something different of IT in order to support an organization that wants to change itself in a much different way. From how we support it today. And so I think those are the factors that drive us to consider going with someone else.
Mr. Chair, if I may, of these transition costs, how much of it is in each of these different transitions? So can you talk about how much of it is transitioning from Unisys to OneNeck versus Solutionary, and then versus our internalizing of some of the functions? And if you can't do that right now, it would be helpful to have some of those details after today.
Chairman Quincy, Councilmember Bender, I do have some things. I think it would be better if I gave you something so that it would make more sense than me rattling off the numbers off of this spreadsheet I have in front of me. That would give you the detail.
Yeah, I'd like to remind folks, we're going to have this as a little bigger discussion on Wednesday, so could be an opportunity to have that, all council members have that information, but a great question on that. Is there anything else? Okay. I'm going to go with Councilmember Yang, followed by Councilmember Andrew Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Dahl, wanted to ask about the increase in contracts for Pillsbury, Winthrop, Shaw, and Pittman. That's $642,000. I mean, that's a one-time expense. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And is that rolled into the transition cost as well, or is that separate from the transition cost of about $10 million?
It's in there. I just wanted to verify, but it is in there.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Johnson, you'll have the last word.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I did want to pass on a question from one of our colleagues, Councilmember Fry. I believe I know the answer to it, but I just want to confirm. So when we purchase equipment back from Unisys, let's say our laptops and computers, does that take into account depreciation on the equipment?
Chairman Quincy, Councilmember Johnson, yes, it does. There's already established depreciation schedules. So in case of some machines, we literally, I believe we own it for $1 because it's depreciated out. There are others based on the fact that if we were to buy something, let's say this year, before we transition, and then we want that asset on our books, that it would be higher than that $1 because we haven't depreciated it all the way out. So yes, there's a schedule for figuring that out.
Great, thank you. And Mr. Chair, I'd like to move forward item number 22, authorizing the execution of a contract with OneNeck, increasing a contract with Pillsbury, Winthrop, Shaw, and Pittman, executing all necessary documents for transferring assets from Unisys to the city, and as well approving a resolution amending the 2015 budget.
Good. Thank you very much for that motion. Are there any questions or comments on Councilmember Johnson's motion? Council Vice President Glidden.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and I'm happy to support this motion. Again, as I said at the beginning of my earlier questions, I just really think there was a very, very thorough process that was done to review our current situation, look at what would be best to put in RFP, and then continue to evaluate options. I'm just going to speak about maybe two elements of this here. One is, and maybe we didn't dig into this as much as we could, but I guess I've had the benefit of a bit of a briefing on this, but I know this whole issue of how much the contract has been tied together, all these very large elements, has been a real challenge in terms of thinking about, could we ever transition? What would be the right time to transition? What is enough of a benefit to justify what is a very large transition cost? And I think the fact that you have found something that is an option with a vendor that you believe through careful vetting provides very good service that meets our needs in a better way for the future, but also does not tie all these pieces of the contract together, that allows us more flexibility in perhaps taking one of those pieces and competitively looking for other options in the future in this very fast-paced, changing world of IT. I just think you have given us very good options to look at, something that is attractive, something where we're not just holding our noses to say, well, it's going to cost us more than we want, but maybe we should do it because 10 years in the future we'll have a better option. So I think you've given us a good option here. The other thing I just want to say, it's been very interesting to watch this proposal come forward and be prepared for us, is we've had a lot of conversation for more than a decade about the option of having more IT-related jobs in the city of Minneapolis. And are we able to do that? Is this really, an environment where the city can provide the support and longevity and sustainability to those jobs that justify bringing more of them in-house? And seeing your team do an investigation of this as an option, seeing this kind of pan out as something that both economically made sense, but led to, I think, a greater opportunity within the city to look for how we provide good benefits in areas where we think we want to add to the city workforce, and we have something that is really a benefit here in the city, and it can be better for the city to have these employees have a tie and a connection to the city enterprise and have that as being part of a value of their work. And so I'm really excited about those opportunities and look forward to hearing more as we work with you and others to kind of see how we're able to recruit for a diverse workforce in the IT department. So I just want to say thank you again for all of the careful work that has gone into this proposal, and in the end has been, I think, an attractive proposal, and I'm happy to support it.
Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to say thank you to staff as well for all your careful and thoughtful work on this, detailed work. It was a ton of work, and I think we're going to see great results from it. And I just want to reflect on the IT industry. It is unbelievable how fast it is moving and evolving and how the needs are changing. And I really appreciate that this contract is going to give us that agility and that flexibility to meet the needs of the organization. And as we have conversations about all sorts of important issues within our city, IT is supporting the advancement of our goals in all of these matters. I look at whether it's the early intervention system in the police department or the new 911 system, which is going to enable call overflow and allow us to be better prepared for responding to high volumes and disaster scenarios, or our enterprise land management system, which has the ability to streamline permitting process for small businesses and really assist with zoning and planning and documentation retention. I mean, at every single level, this work is helping us drive our city goals, and it's so exciting to see thoughtfulness about putting a solution in place. It's going to really support that as we continue forward. And finally, I guess I'll say I started my IT career at the help desk. So it's exciting to see a path forward for people who are getting started so that they can rise up to the ranks as well, recognized for their work and have an opportunity to get to those systems engineers, system architecture, senior system architect positions and really flourish and help drive forward some good work. So thank you.
Thank you very much. The presentation was terrific. And I'd just like to echo both Councilmember Johnson and Vice President Glidden's words of encouragement and thanks and recognition for the entire IT staff, all of the vendors who provided robust responses to the RFP. It gave us something to work with. I recall, of course, Council Vice President will certainly remember those budget years of 2010 when we're dealing with, the mounting change orders and the costs associated with the contract. And we were in a position where we just needed to save money on property taxes. And this was one way to do it, which was extending the contract with Unisys. And that partnership continued through the end of this year. But that also gave us a really good amount of time that we could really study the project, do it well, do it thoughtfully. And I was a member of that initial steering committee, so I was very pleased to be a part of that process and excited to see where we are today. So we look forward to that. Seeing no other further questions or comments on Councilmember Johnson's motion to the actions outlined on the RCA and referring it to the Committee of the Whole and the IT Subcommittee for Wednesday. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. And opposed? That item carries. Thank you very much. Seeing no further business, we are adjourned.